Hello, today's screencast is all about diffusion, osmosis and active transport, and you are going to hopefully by the end of the screencast know what diffusion, osmosis and active transport are and be able to give examples. For students watching this as revision, this is part of B1. Okay, so as always, please pause the screencast and can you please answer these 10 questions. Okay, hopefully you had a go at those, so let's mark the answers as we go through. Number 1, in a plant cell photosynthesis happens in the chloroplast. Number 2, on a leaf, carbon dioxide gets into the plant via the stomata, and the stomata is a little hole on the underside of a leaf surrounded by guard cells. Number 3, the gas made during photosynthesis is oxygen. Number 4, root hair cells increase the surface area. Number 5, the vessel which carries water and minerals around the plant is the xylem. Number 6, the vessel that's two-directional and carries glucose is the phloem, which is spelled P-H-L-O-E-M. Number 7, the function of an artery is to carry blood away from the heart and carry it to organs and respiring tissues. Number 8, statins reduce the cholesterol in the blood. Number 9, a stent can be used to widen an artery. And number 10, the part of a cell that contains DNA that is missing from a red blood cell is the nucleus. Okay, moving on then. We are first of all going to look at diffusion. So this may be revision for some of you if you're watching this as a revision screencast. If not, this may be new, but we'll talk about it now. So diffusion is the net movement of particles from a region of high concentration to a region of low concentration down a concentration gradient. Now this is shown on this diagram here, so you'll see the high concentration is at the right hand side, the low concentration is at the left. So the molecules move from where there's more to where there is less. Now it is called the net movement because although most of the molecules will move from where there's high to low, some will move the other way as well. So you might have 10 going from right to left and you might have 2 going from left to right. So the overall net movement would be 8 because you've 10 going that way, 2 going that way. So the overall, you take the 2 away from the 10, which would give us 8. So the particles will move until they're evenly spread out. So until they're completely evenly spread out within the liquid or within the gas. They'll still keep moving, but obviously you've not got that high to low anymore. And the last bullet point there is no additional energy is needed. This is what we call a passive process. So please make sure you have written that definition down. The main thing to remember though is from high concentration to low concentration. Okay, right, moving on then. There are 3 statements there. Please can you read them and write A, B and C and decide whether they are true or false. If they are false, please can you correct them. Okay, so part A, diffusion involves the movement of molecules in one direction. That is false. Molecules will move in both directions. B, diffusion does not need additional energy. That is true. And C, diffusion involves the net movement of molecules predominantly from a high concentration to a low concentration until the molecules are evenly spread out. That is also true. Okay, right, so now what we are going to look at, we are going to look at how organisms, so how plants and animals are actually adapted to allow the most efficient diffusion to take place. So in other words, we're going to look at which factors allow diffusion to happen at the fastest rate possible, because that is what enables plants and animals to function effectively. So the first one we are going to look at is this. So we've got part A here and part B, and we've also got this sort of membrane in the middle. So this might be gas molecules moving. So if you look at the blue ones, so you've got more blue on the left-hand side, more blue on the left-hand side. So the molecules are going to move from left to right predominantly. But this time we're really looking at this in the middle. So we're looking at the surface area. So this here it's got quite a low surface area. This one covers the same space, but because it's got these sort of indentations in them, so they've got sort of that wiggle there, that increases the surface area, which means that there is actually more gaps along there for the particles to move. So B has got the largest surface area, and because it's got a larger surface area, diffusion will happen faster. So that means more particles will be able to move across at a quicker rate. So the main thing I want you to take from this is that the larger the surface area, the faster diffusion will take place. We are now going to look at an example of this. So this is a drawing of part of our small intestine. Okay, so our small intestines are where glucose, for example, will move from the small intestine into our blood. Now they've got this folded lining, okay, so the wall is folded, and that folding there increases the surface area of the intestines, which means that diffusion can happen faster. Okay, so this is just one example. Another example would be the alveoli in the lungs. So the alveoli have got a really, really huge surface area within our lungs, which means that oxygen can quickly move out of them into the blood, and carbon dioxide can quickly move back into them, so we can breathe it out by the process of diffusion. Okay, so an increased surface area will increase the rate of diffusion. Okay, let's look at the next one then. So this time we're looking at the distance that the particles need to travel. Hopefully you'll see on A that there's actually quite a short distance, because this membrane here that they're moving through is quite thin, whereas on B the membrane is thicker. Now this time it will be A where diffusion will happen faster, and that is because the particles have got a shorter distance to travel, which I think logically makes sense. You will move at 1 meter faster than you will be able to move across 2 meters, because it is a shorter distance. Okay, so for this one, it is the shorter distance that will allow diffusion to happen faster, because obviously it has got it will take less time to travel. Okay, so the shorter distance for this one. Let's look at an example. So the example I'm using here is a capillary. So capillary is where, for example, gases move out of the capillaries into the respiring cells, such as oxygen, and carbon dioxide will need to move back in. Okay, now because the capillary has got a wall that is only 1 cell thick, that means that diffusion of gases and other substances will happen much faster. Another example is a leaf. If you think of how thin a leaf is, so if you held a leaf sideways, it is really, really thin, and that allows gases to quickly travel through the leaf and get to the cells. So carbon dioxide can quickly get into the leaf, get to the palisade cells where photosynthesis is taking place. So it is really beneficial for things like the alveoli, things like the capillaries, leaves to be really thin, as it allows the distance that the gases have to move to be much shorter. Okay, right, the next one then, moving on, is looking at the concentration gradient. So if you look at A here, A and B have got the same amount of particles represented by stars on the left hand side. But if you look here, A has got more stars on the right hand side, B has got less stars on the right hand side. Now diffusion will happen both, and remember, look, these arrows show that diffusion is happening in both ways, but B diffusion will happen faster, and that is because the concentration gradient is steeper. What that means is there is a bigger difference between the number of particles on this side and the number of particles on that side. So because the difference is greater, diffusion will happen faster. Okay, diffusion will still happen in A, but it will just happen slightly slower. So concentration gradient is steeper, that will allow diffusion to happen faster. Okay, looking at an example for this then. Now, during the day, the concentration of oxygen is greater inside the palisade cells. So these cells here, there's more oxygen during the day, and that is because photosynthesis is taking place when there is light during the day. So there'll be loads of oxygen in this layer. Now that means that there'll be more oxygen in this layer, so it will move by diffusion across the cell, and there'll be more oxygen inside than there is outside, and therefore oxygen will move from the leaf out of the stomata into the air. So it's going from a high concentration to a low concentration. Now, the bigger the difference, the faster it will happen. Okay, now there is a little extension question there. Which way will carbon dioxide move and why? Carbon dioxide is being used in the leaf, so the concentration will be greater outside. So carbon dioxide during the day will move into the leaf from an area of high concentration to an area of low concentration. Okay, so the last example there is to do with the increased concentration gradient. Okay. Right, so in summary, the rate of photosynthesis, or just looking at plants in this instance, the rate of photosynthesis can be maximised if the distance is as short as possible, if the concentration gradient is as big as possible, and if the surface area is as large as possible. In an exam, if it asks you how can you increase the rate of diffusion, please do not just put distance. You need to put a shorter distance. Please do not just put concentration gradient. You need to put a higher or larger concentration gradient. And please do not just put surface area. You have to say that a larger surface area will help to increase the rate of diffusion. Okay, right, so moving on. Looking at our second type of diffusion today, we're looking at a very specific one, which is osmosis. Now, osmosis is a type of diffusion, but it is a special type that just involves water. So please make sure you write this down. Osmosis is the net movement of water from an area of high water concentration to an area of low water concentration through a partially permeable membrane. So this is different to diffusion, because diffusion is just molecules moving from high to low. If you get a question about osmosis, first of all, name osmosis, because often they don't. Secondly, please mention water, because it is only water that moves by osmosis. And please say that the water moves from an area of high to an area of low water concentration. And it's really important that you get the partially permeable membrane in there. Okay, because often this is 3 marks, and the 3 marks are the osmosis, the mention of water moving from an area of high water to low water, and that it's through a partially permeable membrane. So if you look at this diagram here, you can see the partially permeable membrane in the middle, whereas diffusion doesn't have one of those. Okay, so I just wanted to mention some other words that you will need to know. These diagrams here at the top are plant cells, these are animal cells. Now, if you put a plant cell into a hypertonic solution, hypertonic means that it is a solution surrounding the cell that has got less water molecules and more salt molecules or sugar molecules. So in other words, there is more water within the cell. So if there's more water within the cell, water will move out by osmosis from a high water concentration to a low water concentration. And this leaves the cell plasmolysed. And plasmolysed means that all the parts of the cell shrink away from the cell wall, and the cell loses its shape as well. Okay? That is what is happening if you see a plant that is wilting. When it loses its shape, all the cells are becoming plasmolysed. And it means you've not watered your plant properly. Okay, if a cell is put in an isotonic solution, that means it's in a solution with the same amount of water, the same concentration of other solutes. So water will move in at the same rate as water moves out. Okay, now if a plant cell is put into a hypotonic solution, that means there's more water outside the cell, so water will move in by osmosis and the cell will become turgid. And this is when the cell is full of water and is functioning really well. Okay, now often in exams they ask you this to do with a potato. So if you put part of a potato into pure water, the potato should gain mass. If you put it into a solution that's got lots of salt or lots of sugar, the potato should lose mass, because water will move from the potato into the surrounding area. Make sure you look back at the required practicals, because that is one of the required practicals you need to know about. Okay, now if we look at this to do with animal cells, isotonic, hypo mean the same. So hyper means a solution with lots of solutes in. Hypo means one that's got lots of water. But this time, the hypertonic solution, water will move out of our cells and our cells will become crenated, okay, which is spelled C-R-E-N-A-T-E-D. So they will be crenated, they'll start to shrivel up. Isotonic, water's moving in at the same pace as it's moving out. If it's in a hypotonic, water can move into our cells and our cells can actually start to burst, which can be very dangerous, which is called lysis, L-Y-S-I-S. Okay, so the different words are used in plant cells that are used in animal cells. Okay, so remember also osmosis is a type of diffusion, but it's to do with water from high to a low concentration of water, and there's got to be a partially permeable membrane present. Okay, right, the last one then is active transport. So an example of active transport is the movement of minerals into a root. So this represents a root. If you look at the black dots, they represent the minerals. Now, if you look, there's less minerals outside than there is inside, which is a problem, because if diffusion happened, all of the minerals would be moving out, which would kill the plant. So there has to be another process that allows the minerals to move in, and this is what we call active transport. Now, active transport is still the movement of molecules, but the molecules move in a different way, which is defined on the next slide. So remember, we want these black little dots here to move in from an area of low to high, which is different than what we've been talking about for diffusion and osmosis. Okay, so active transport. The three components of active transport that you need to know and that are different to diffusion are as follows. Active transport is against a concentration gradient, so it goes from where there's low number of particles to where there is high. It requires a carrier protein, which you can see on this diagram here, which is in the cell membrane, and really importantly, it requires energy. Now, the energy will come from respiration in the form of ATP. So ATP is a molecule, a storage molecule of energy, and that energy is used to change this carrier protein. So the three things you need to know, it's particles moving from low concentration to high. It requires a carrier protein in the cell membrane, and it also needs energy from respiration. Okay, which are three things that are different to diffusion. Okay, so in summary, please can you copy this table, and in the first row there you just need to put a tick or a cross. So if the molecules move from high to low concentration, you would give a tick. If they don't, you'd put a cross. The same from low to high concentration. Then you need to put a tick or cross is energy needed. So if it's needed, tick. If it's not, cross. And then an example of where diffusion, osmosis, active transport takes place, either in a plant or an animal. Okay, so pause the screencast now, have a go at completing that table. I've put some extra notes here at the bottom about diffusion being gases and dissolved gases, so things within solutions can also diffuse. I've also put osmosis needs a partially permeable membrane, and I've included that active transport needs a carrier protein. Okay, have a go and then unpause. Okay, so hopefully you filled it in like this. So diffusion and osmosis are both high to low. Active transport isn't. Diffusion and osmosis are not low to high, whereas active transport is. The only one that needs energy is active transport. And I've given you some examples. Yours might be slightly different, that's fine, but I've put for diffusion, oxygen moving into the blood from the alveoli. Osmosis is water into a root hair cell from the soil, and minerals into a root hair cell again from the soil. Okay, so that is the end of today's screencast. So we have done some revision on osmosis, diffusion and active transport. Thank you for listening. Thank you for watching. Have a lovely day. Take care.